draft weekend, and we get into the Saturday portion of that. And Luke, I get some French toast going, and I work it all out around noon. And I sort of miss the old Saturday, Sunday format. I know the league loves this Thursday night thing. Everybody in Nashville, they left behind millions of dollars for the economy there. If we ever get our city fixed, and that's my Baltimore Positive mission, and we'll be talking about that on Thursday night with Dutch Rupersberger over at Pizza John's. Maybe we can have a draft party here, but either way, the Ravens had a bunch of picks on Saturday, went after it, and wound up with a quarterback, wound up with a bunch of other players that become interesting names around here. But certainly the Ravens value these draft picks. No more drafts moving forward. They're going to come out of this thing with 5 or 6 picks. They're always trying to get more bodies, and that really becomes a Saturday afternoon game.
Yeah, I don't know if you're always going to see like what they did last year where they had so many picks. It tied a record for the number of picks they had made, but I think you're always going to see the Ravens wanting to come away with at least an 8-man draft class. I mean, you might not have 12 like they did a year ago, but they want picks. And certainly Eric DeCosta talked a lot about how frustrated he was waiting as long as he did on Friday because they didn't have a second-round pick to just make a selection, seeing so many players come off the board. But he also said Saturday is really the day that defines the draft, which, I understand the point he's trying to make, but I also think it's easy to say that until you whiff on your first-round pick, and then everyone's really frustrated with that year's draft. I mean, see Matt Elam in 2013, see Rashad Perriman 2 years later. But I think his overall point is day 3 is what can turn a solid draft into a great draft. And I think with some of the names that the Ravens came away with, and we've talked a little bit about Justice Hill, we talked a little bit about Ben Powers, but even look at the final 3 draft picks that the Ravens made. Iman Marshall, the cornerback from USC, a 4-year starter. I think a lot of people at first glance were a little surprised. Why would you take a corner? But then you remember that Brandon Carr is going to be 33 next month, and Jimmy Smith turns 31 in July, and he's in the final year of his contract. So right off the bat, 2 of your top 3 outside corners are on the wrong side of 30. And you would have to think at least one of those guys is gone next year, and very likely, very well possible, both of them are gone. So you need to.
Well, they're not going to commit $25 million to the interior of the defensive line, right?
Sure. So in the case of a cornerback, Iman Marshall made perfect sense. I think there's some question whether he's best suited to play corner or safety long term in the NFL. He's not the most gifted athlete. So I think there's some debate there. But for your final 4th-round pick, it makes sense. And then when you get into looking at Daylon Mack, who was a highly touted recruit going to Texas A&M and actually had a fairly underwhelming career there until his senior year when he finally became a starter. And he had 5.5 sacks. He had 9.5 tackles for loss for that Aggies defense. He's someone that, as a 5th-round pick, I don't necessarily anticipate him being a star, although if the Ravens know one position, it's finding defensive tackles. They've found undrafted guys. They've drafted guys early, middle of the draft, late, and they've had a lot of success there. So if they've identified Daylon Mack as someone they wanted, then that's worth paying attention to. But I think you look at that selection, probably not going to be someone who plays a ton as a rookie. But when you consider Michael Pierce is going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, and if you're going to sign him, then what does that mean for Brandon Williams, whose cap numbers are getting higher as he gets deeper into his contract? I would say right now, I'd be surprised if both Brandon Williams and Michael Pierce are on this roster next year, so Daylon Mack could be part of the equation there, especially if he comes in and plays well. So, the Marshall and Mack picks, I think, were much more, those were made with 2020 and beyond in mind. And then you throw in Trace McSorley, who had a really good 2017 season at Penn State when they still had Saquon Barkley.
This is the point where, like, I should tell everybody you're a little bit more Penn State than you are Maryland these days, right?
Yeah, but just look at what Trace McSorley did 2 years ago. Now, he had much better talent on the offensive side of the ball, and I think that's a big reason why. And then last year, still showed the mobility. He ran for plenty of yards, but the accuracy really left him, and that's really what took him from being probably a guy who had a decent chance to be drafted early on day 3 rather than late on day 3 as it ended up being. But he's a good athlete. He's a guy who has a pretty impressive college pedigree, won a lot of games at Penn State, and when you consider his skill set, now, his athleticism pales in comparison to what Lamar Jackson can do, but he's still a guy who can run and can do some things that you would think he's developmentally interesting as far as what kind of offense the Ravens want to run. Is there a chance that he could eventually develop into a backup quarterback? Sure. I'm not going to dismiss that possibility, but I think the Ravens, with the 6th-round pick, keep in mind, if McSorley can't hack it, he'll be cut, and that's just the way it goes with 6th and 7th-round picks. So I don't understand anyone getting all bent out of shape when they make any pick in the 6th or 7th round. But McSorley can come in, maybe have him try to do some things like New Orleans did with Taysom Hill. Play some special teams, maybe have. If you really like him, maybe he gets a package of a few plays, gadget plays that he comes in, and who knows? Maybe one day he develops enough to be the backup, and 2-3 years from now, and Robert Griffin III moves on. So, I think in the case of McSorley, and John Harbaugh joked about this a little bit. Harbaugh, of course, being a Michigan man, said how much he hated Trace McSorley the last few years because of some of the things he was able to do at Penn State in the Big Ten. But I think he said it best. He described him as a tough-ass competitor, and McSorley, not physically gifted in the way that you want a quarterback to be in terms of size, but he has some athleticism to the point where if you're going to run this offense that's unconventional and you're going to zig while everyone else is zagging with Lamar Jackson, you better have some backups who have a similar skill set. And they have that with RG3, and they'll take a look at Trace McSorley in the spring and summer and see if he's worth holding on to if they think he could eventually be the backup, say, next year, a year beyond that.
Well, here's the flippant part where I would say when you have a quarterback that's running into linebackers the way we saw him do last year, the backup quarterback's going to be really important.
Yeah. And this might be a case, and let's be clear, last year was the first time in a decade that the Ravens had carried 3 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster, so I wouldn't just assume that Trace McSorley is going to make the team by any stretch, but to your point, when you do have quarterbacks who are running, there is going to be more of an inherent risk of them getting hurt. So, it might be a case of maybe Trace McSorley doesn't make the 53-man roster, but they like him enough to keep him on the practice squad. And, to your possible scenario, heaven forbid, but it's a possibility, Lamar Jackson goes down, then you're talking about needing to make a move, and at the very least, you would have a backup quarterback then who would have, a mobility and a skill set that would be more conducive to running that kind of a system than, say, a statuesque pocket passer who isn't going to do the things that Lamar Jackson or Robert Griffin III can do. So, we'll see how it plays out. I think it's interesting just because Penn State is a team relatively close, and I will say this, I know when the Ravens held their local pro day, which, they invite prospects from Maryland and all the surrounding schools. Penn State was one of those schools, and I know Trace McSorley made a good impression on the organization when he was here in Owings Mills for that pro day. So we'll see. Again, he gets a little more attention than the typical 6th-round pick because he is a quarterback, but McSorley had a pretty decent pedigree at Penn State, had a really good junior season, and regressed his senior year with lacking some of that talent that he had before. But if he can get his passing, his accuracy really waned last year after it was pretty good the year before that. If he can look more like the guy he was his junior year, then I think he has a chance to eventually be a guy who could be a backup quarterback in the NFL. So you see how it plays out, and like it gives you another good athlete to experiment and try some different things with. And I even joked with John Harbaugh on Saturday. Well, we saw 2 quarterbacks on the field at times last year. Dare I say we might see 3 this year, which I don't think we're going to see that, but it does just speak to potential for a little more creativity if McSorley proves himself worthy of a roster spot.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you either by my cup or my hat. It's Cole Roofing. I attended Bill Cole's 100th anniversary for Cole Roofing on Friday night down at the Museum of Industry. It was an unbelievable night. I'm going to have Bill on later on in the week. We are fixing Baltimore and Baltimore Positive. On Thursday night, we'll be at Pizza John's with Dutch Ruppersberger. Come meet your congressman and say hello. We're going to be talking about the future of Baltimore. Don Moeller, former Baltimore County Executive, Mike Kemosabe, for all things Baltimore Positive. We hope to see you at Pizza John's. I'm going dimly lit in here today. I hope Bill doesn't mind that his logo is a little lighter. Same thing with Pizza John's here. I got to get more light in here, but it dries my eyes out in the studio. Also, our Sporticulture friends delivering the flowers here. Give Court some love. Find them out at sporticulture.com as well. We love all of our sponsors, including Compass Point Golf. Good weather this week. Get on down there. 36 holes. Billy Casper course. And, of course, Robert Kennedy will be joining us this week to continue to talk about the aftermath of Tiger Mania around here. Luke, there was certainly mania in Nashville and seeing what this draft has become. And, Coach Billick's been our partner for really as long as you've been here. It's, going on a dozen years now. And I remember back in the beginning when he would go to the drafts in New York, he would be so excited. And I went to the draft in '96 and thought it was rather sleepy. I could have gone to New York anytime, any of those drafts, any of the Boulware drafts or the Todd Heap draft, any of that stuff. And we always did our parties here. And for the nerds that collected Mel Kiper's book or Joel Bushbaum's book or any of those things, we talked draft here for months. In the modern era, this thing's now moved to a Thursday night. It's now moved city to city like a traveling road circus. And Philadelphia had it. Nashville has it. Would love to see Baltimore get it. I think we have to make some Baltimore Positive improvements around here. But for the mania of the draft and what the league has done and what Goodell's done and playing the black hat and getting booed and turning it into a WWE country event. Here comes Tim McGraw going to sing some songs. And they're going all over the world for the circus and cheerleaders in the harbor. And the incredible thing with Mo Gabba on Saturday here. But for the town itself and for the draft itself, it really has become quite the party, man.
It really has, and it really is amazing, Nestor, because I don't get it. Because here's the, and look, I'm not trying to sound like cranky old guy here.
Well, and all your friends and family are Philadelphia people. It would have been very easy for everybody to load up the kids into the family roadster and go to Philly and participate in what is essentially a big block drinking party, right?
And you just said it. It's just the dichotomy of what this really is for people. I mean, to host the draft in your city, that's what it is. It's a big party. And for anyone who wants to experience the party aspect of it, then God bless you. That's fun. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be critical of that.
You're not trying to act like an over 35 guy.
Right. But my point is, in saying I don't get it, is if you care about the NFL draft and it's something you follow and you're into the mock drafts and you're into rankings and following the combine and pro days and tracking team visits and which 30 players the Ravens are bringing into Owings Mills, the last thing I would want to do is to go to a place where people are congregating and who knows what cell service is going to be like with that many people with a short, condensed. You don't have a way of really following the draft in the way that you can when you just put your feet up on your couch and you have your laptop or your tablet and you're flipping between NFL Network, ESPN, and ABC, and I mean just the sheer number of networks, both television and radio, that covers the draft. I mean, you have no shortage of coverage and analysis and highlights, and it's incredible. And for me, that part of it, if that's what you're into, to me, the last thing you would want to do is to go to a place where there are just going to be thousands of people drinking beer and listening to loud music, and maybe you can hear Mel Kiper, maybe you can hear Rich Eisen or whoever, whichever host you prefer, but you're not going to really experience, the draft or consume the draft in the same way. But I certainly understand the party part of it, certainly the economic stimulation that you can have with having that many people come into your city. I'm with you. I'd love to see Baltimore have it someday. But just the idea of it, I guess, is my point where I kind of struggle with, if you like the draft, to me, you'll want to watch it on TV and have all those resources to really be able to know what's going on and following social media and all those different aspects of it. Whereas if you don't really follow the draft, going to a draft party, I guess, if the weather's nice and there's some good musical acts, yeah, I think it's great in that regard. So I just think that's an interesting juxtaposition as far as how people consume the draft. To me, the diehards who remember waking up on Saturday morning and having brunch and watching draft coverage for 8 hours and then doing it all over again the next day.
Those were the days back in my day.
Yeah, I love that. But what this thing has become, hey, God bless them. It's a credit to people who had the vision to make this the event it has. And as I said, I'd love to see Baltimore have it. But just me personally, it just seems weird. Like, I guess, and the numbers show there are plenty of people who want to do it, but I guess I think of like my family, for example, my mom, my sister, my brother, who watched the Ravens every Sunday, but they couldn't have named 5 players in this year's draft class coming out. I don't know. I never would have thought there would have been that much appeal to go to the draft, but I think the numbers and the last 4 or 5 years speak for itself as far as how successful it's been. Anywhere it's been a good event. And even in Nashville, they had some pouring down rain Thursday night for a period of time. It didn't seem to dampen anyone's spirits. So it really is amazing what this thing has become. And, I hope it doesn't become even more extreme. Like, heaven forbid we turn this into a thing where we do one round per night and it's a 7-day event. I don't know what we'll do if it turns into something that extreme.
Be like a fortnight at Wimbledon. We're just going to use the whole month of April to pick football players, right?
Exactly. But that said, my own personal, not confusion, but I guess I'm just a little mystified by, why it's such a big deal as far as that part of it.
You know what it is? It's people love football, and it's the only thing that really happens at all. And
you're 5 months away
for 9 months, it's just sort of like the 4th of July weekend breaking up the summer, literally.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And like I said, I'm coming more from the perspective as someone that I can remember being in college, and the 2003 draft always comes to mind for me. It was my second year at Syracuse, rolled out of bed, had brunch, and I just sat there, and I had my computer with my draft rankings pulled up, and that was a time
Who
where...
is this Kyle Bowler?
I knew probably... and this was long before I was in the media or anything like that. I legitimately knew who the top 125 prospects were, and I love that. So to see what it's become since then, I don't like the format nearly as much now, but I totally understand the business aspects of it. I guess I'm just amazed that so many people who maybe don't really follow the draft that closely want to be there for the event. But to your point, we're still a little under 4 months away from the Ravens playing a game, or over 4 months away from the Ravens playing a game that matters. So, yeah, gives you a chance to go out and do the tailgate thing and have some beverages, listen to some music, catch up with some of your buddies that you might not see other than football season, and why not? And like I said, because it's been so successful, you'd love to see it here in Baltimore at some point in time, that's for sure.
I did that at Silver Spring Mining on draft night up in Bel Air. We were there a lot last week for hockey. We're going to be putting some more things together, and I know the Orioles kind of have us all down with the way they're playing, and you wonder why people get together on draft weekends. Well, it's either that or watch the Orioles play, and obviously they're not playing hockey or basketball in the nation's capital right now. Although I know all your friends and family are excited about this 76ers run, so I'll put on my old Dr. J throwback for you, Luke. All of our WNST coverage, of course, brought to you by our friends at Silver Spring Mining. Saw Gary Rissling out at the the bull roast and oyster roast, incredible event they had out at the race day at the fairgrounds in Timonium on Sunday. Saw a lot of friends out there from all over the county. Saw Johnny D, saw Jack Milani from Monahan's, saw my boy Mark from Riverwatch. We got a lot of friends out there saying hello, and I appreciate them stopping by and saying hello. But Silver Spring Mining Company, our newest sponsor, doing some hockey games up there, but of course doing that delicious crab pretzel we're talking about, including the mini crab pretzel. You can even take them home now, so it's awesome. Silver Spring Mining Company, 3 locations, Perry Hall, Bel Air, and of course in Hunt Valley for you. Luke, last thing on the draft, and I guess just sort of to wrap this thing up, we haven't talked and gone around other teams and whether the Browns won 4 Super Bowls this weekend now that they've already won 1. And I think going through pick by pick and seeing where teams are, but what Miami did, from a quarterback position, for what was going to happen to Josh Rosen and how the weekend became a little bit more about him than maybe even Kyler Murray to some degree.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I'll say this: I didn't hear the specific rant, but I know Steve Smith took some shots at Josh Rosen, which
I did watch the 3-minute rant on that.
I like, I like what Steve did in his NFL career, and he was good here in Baltimore. I thought that was unwarranted. If the most you can complain about a guy is that he unfollowed the Cardinals on Twitter, I mean, come on. I thought he handled himself about as well as he could, given those circumstances. And I think what Miami did there, they gave themselves an opportunity. There's been so much talk about the Dolphins tanking for Tua. And look, it still may turn out that way, especially if Josh Rosen can't play. And he didn't exactly have a strong year last year with Arizona, but that's also acknowledging didn't have a whole lot around him. Let's face it. I mean, that team wasn't good.
Well, it's a good year to tank because you think you're going to get a quarterback, right?
Yeah. So, but in the case of Miami, this is, they take a commodity whose stock had dipped, obviously. The fact that they didn't have to give up a first-round pick to get him speaks to that, but now you have a chance to look at Josh Rosen for a year, and you see, and if he takes some strides, then, boy, you just got yourself a franchise quarterback for pennies on the dollar compared to what Arizona gave.
Well, I mean, the example there would be Brett Favre, right?
Of course. I mean, what?
And that's the ultimate example, but if he's a guy who can just play for 5 years for you, then you win. You win big time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're hoping, that he can be, I think they're hoping he could be the guy that, a lot of teams were excited about last year. I mean, keep in mind, Arizona maneuvered to take him last year. I mean, there were people who thought Rosen might end up being the number 1 overall pick last year before the Baker Mayfield hysteria set in really late in the draft process. So I thought that was interesting. So for Miami, I still don't think they're going to be very good in 2019, but you have, at worst, you've added a really intriguing maybe at the quarterback position. And, where does that rank compared to a Daniel Jones or a Dwayne Haskins, or you start getting a little bit later in the draft? I mean, I'll put it this way. What Miami did compared to what Cincinnati did, which was take Ryan Finley in the 4th round, I sure as heck rather trade a 2nd-round pick for Josh Rosen rather than be in the 4th round and trade up to get Ryan Finley in the 4th round. I mean,
there's also the question as to whether you're trying to run your quarterback off or not. And Joe Flacco woke up to that again on Friday, right?
Yeah, and I was just going to get to Denver, where it's very clear that I think it was very obvious John Elway liked Drew Lock, but in a position where they traded back, they were the team that traded with Pittsburgh in the 1st round. They take a tight end, and then they took an offensive tackle with their 2nd-round pick, and then they get Drew Lock, which in the 2nd round eases the pressure on him. I think the pressure is on Joe either way. Let's face it. I mean, when you're at this point in your career, you've been cast off by the team that you won a Super Bowl for. He's very much in that category of needing to prove himself. And if he proves himself and plays at a high level, then I'm guessing Denver will delay the start of the Drew Lock era. But if Joe struggles to stay on the field and his production is just well, we'll probably see Drew Lock sooner rather than later. So this is just the reality, and I'm not surprised. I mean, if I were Denver, even if I was a believer in Joe Flacco, I still would have drafted a quarterback relatively early because that's just the reality. Joe's 34, and as I've said to you, as much as you can kind of speak to how much, you look at his stats and the talent around him and how much of the Ravens' lackluster play was him compared to all the other variables at work, trying to divvy up the blame, so to speak. I think we all would look at the durability with the hip, with the back, with the knee before that, and you start to wonder, can Joe Flacco give you not 16 games, because I think he can do that, but can he give you a healthy 16 games that it's not impacting his play? And he hasn't done that for a couple years. I mean, even 2017 played 16 games, so we all know that back was an issue for most, at least the first half of that season. So I think if you're Denver, even if you really like what you've seen from Flacco, and it sounds like the early reviews have been positive, that was always going to be the outcome. I would have been surprised if they didn't come away with a quarterback somewhere in the first 3 or 4 rounds. It ended up being Drew Lock in the second round, but Joe has every opportunity to play well and to hold off Drew Lock. So we'll see how it plays out in the same way that we were all intrigued to see how it was going to play out last year here in Baltimore.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. And Luke at WNST.net breaking down the draft. Got some baseball going on this weekend. We'll both be watching a little basketball and hockey as well, and getting ready for spring to be sprung. The BuyAToyota.com audio vault is there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Don't forget, on Thursday night, we hope to see you at Pizza John's along with Dutch Ruppersberger and Don Moeller. We are launching Baltimore Positive. It is our new initiative to make the city a better place, which we're all working on. I spent the whole weekend in the city. I still love Baltimore. Do you? We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.